He'll be tracking him in here. By the time the ball gets played, he's here, and he can't hold the line. Okay, so it's impossible to hold the line when there's runners and stuff in there. So that's the two biggest things. So it ends up getting behind you a lot easier than you would if you go inside. Okay, the second, if you look at the other side, well, what are the benefits of going inside? Now, I'm not saying you don't do that. It just depends. You might say, listen, they've got a player in here that we don't want them getting the ball to. He's their key player, right? And he plays in there. So you might say, we can deal with that 1v1, but we don't want him getting on the ball in those areas, and therefore balls threaded into him. So you might dictate that, well, I'll take my chances on that one, but I'm not happy with it going in there. So you might say, well, which one is the biggest threat, if you like. So you might consider that. The benefits, of course, of him showing inside is now, when they play into these areas, you've got more people behind the ball. So that obviously helps. But sometimes there's comfort in numbers. You've got plenty there, but none of them are doing jobs. Okay, so they've all got to still do particular jobs. Otherwise, it doesn't matter how many you've got there. They've still got to do the work, right? So if we now intercept balls into here, then you're counter-attacking from the best area on the pitch, which is central. Okay, so the stats will tell you that the most counter-attacks, effective counter-attacks, are done from the central area. Okay, it's very difficult to counter-attack by winning it here and playing. And counter-attacking is a big part of the game. Before they get set, you want to try and hurt them. It's very difficult to do it when the ball's in here and then they can just shift across. And it's more difficult to break down. Okay, so the most counter-attack successful ones are done from central areas in there, because you open up all your options and it's harder for them to cover the full width of the pitch.
All right, Coach. Next question, anybody?
You talked a bit about the visual cue of not releasing one of the screen players until it's back in behind the defense.
Yeah.
In terms of attack, what the session wasn't about, what about how to release those players when your outside mids have their heads up and are able to either penetrate or pass?
Yeah.
When would you release any of the screen players at that point?
Depends who I'm playing against.
Yeah.
Right? So we played England in the 16s in November, beat them 4-0, keeping the two in there. Okay? Now, we go and play Northern Ireland, no disrespect, but I'll let one of them go at opportune times. Depends who you're playing, depends on your game plan. So there's not, again, a right and a wrong. It depends on the type of players you've got. If you've got one that can get in the box, do it. So if you look at the World Cup, Brazil did it with two designated sitting. Okay? Spain did it with Busquets and Alonso. So there was freedom in one going and one coming back to cover, and they'd rotate a bit. Okay? And when they were set, both were there, but in possession, one of them would definitely go and link in, and so on. So you can do it in different ways. Depends on your players is number one. Number two is, if you want to teach them that system, okay, if you want to teach them that system, and I suggest you do these days, then I would say that there are times, you might be closing down the game. You're 10 minutes to go, you're up 2-0. The last thing you want to do is be bombing on, get caught on the counter-attack in central areas. They're back in the game and you potentially can lose the game. So, depends what level we're talking about here. And even in development, they need to be taught how to close games off. Not just keep going to the end. Well, why would you? They've got to learn the game as they develop. So, yeah, as I say, Tony Peel
this morning with Wolves. You watched the Wolves get Man City. Man City allowed Wolves to go back into the match and ended up being 4-3. And the last 5 minutes, Man City was panicking.
Yeah. So what I would say is, up to your players, up to how you want to play, your philosophy. But they need to be clear. That's the point I was making. I picked up just an example of what Tony does at Stoke. Okay, that's the only time that they go is when the ball's in behind the fullback. So I just wanted to share that as an example of. You might say, anytime the wide man gets the ball and can get his head up and can play into those areas, you might say, right, striker, you peel off, and I want you now making that run. That's great. Okay. Key thing is you've got to know, counter-attacks are going to hurt us centrally if we haven't got that covered. So who's going to do what in here to make sure that if we lose it, they don't hurt us down there? How you want to do that, entirely up to your players, and you and your players, really. So, yeah, different ways of doing it.
Next question.
There's 3 attacking players who play ahead of your screen. Yeah?
Yeah.
You've asked the centre want to pick up their deep line midfield player.
Yeah.
How far do you want the white players to drop back in
Okay.
the defensive role?
Yeah, okay. So again, I think I explained it that I used the striker I had as the one that would be dropping in, and there would be a long striker up ahead of him. So you had to just, so the game, when you're playing in small-sided games, then the conditions you give him have got to be consistent to what you want them to do in the game after. So I could have told him, you know, stay on the 2 centre backs, for example, and do all of that. But in the game, if I want him dropping in there, then I've wasted time and I've confused him by giving him information that's not relevant to the game. So the way I start is you work backwards. You know what you want as your final picture, then you work backwards and work it to how you're going to get there. Okay, so you've got to have that final picture in mind first. So the way I did it with them 3. So there's the midfield screen. Okay, so the way with those 3, how deep do they come? The point I made was that they would always get between the ball and the wide man. Okay, so that would be, if they would be in an all-in in an 11v11, right back would be here, say, wide man would be here. Depends where the ball is now. In relation to the ball, you know, if the ball's here, get between him and the ball. The only way you can get it to him is over your head. If the ball's out here, get between him and the ball. Okay, but also we've talked about making sure there's no big gaps. So he'd be around there. Yeah, so he's in that half-half position, and then when we win it, on the opposite side, he's always the one that's the first one that's free. Yeah, so I wouldn't say, well, 10 yards this way, 10 yards. I would say get between, simple information for them. So when I gave that information to Justin, so when it happened on the other side and he wasn't in the right position, I asked him where should he be. He knew, so I knew, regardless if he's able to do that immediately, at least I know he understands. And that's my job, is to make sure they understand. They might not execute it correctly every time, but if they're going away knowing clearly what they should be doing, then that's your job as a coach. The worst thing you can do is contradict yourself and say, no, don't go, you've got to track him now. So, well, when am I supposed to track him and when am I supposed to get in between? Depends. In that particular one, that's the difference. You've got to know the difference in the systems. If you're playing 4-4-2, he would be level or goal side of him. That's what, so we tell players, we had it, Roberto Martinez, who's on my pro license now, signed Victor Moses from Crystal Palace, one of the elite players coming through in English football, 22 years of age, right? Premier League player, and he said to him when he arrived, I want you to concentrate on knowing what to do when we're playing 4-4-2 and what to do when we play 4-2-3-1. He goes, what's the difference? And he's an elite player getting 40 grand a week or something, or more, you know? So we've got to educate them. We've got to educate them to understand the roles and the different systems. So in a 4-4-2, he would be getting goal side. The ball's here or there, whatever, he'd be getting goal side of him. Okay, in a 4-2-3-1, he doesn't. He gets between him and the ball, and they're playing slightly. So the gap now between the wide man and the full-back is greater, right? Anelka for Chelsea, when he plays out here, he comes a certain part of the way, and then he says, up to you now, you go and deal with that. And then when we win it, he's in positions to hurt. So you play to your player's strengths.
Next question. 2 more.
The key thing on it, sorry, just the one point which is general, okay? Mr. Kipling's words. So, why is the first thing? Okay, then it's about the detail you need to give players is all about that. They should know the answers to all of those. Who does what? What does, these two do? What do they do? What do they do, and so on? So who does what? Okay. First of all, why do you want that? Well, I want to play with a 2-screen because the counter-attacks in them areas, for example. So why do you want to play like that? Well, my players, it suits them, and we've got 3 here that can really break at speed, whatever. So why is the first thing. Then it's about, right, who does what? What does he do? You know, well, he shows inside on this side. When he's on the opposite side, he gets between the ball and the wide man, etc., etc. So who does what? When do they do it? Okay. Where do they do it in terms of relation to the pitch? Okay. And how do they do it? Okay. So that might be how are we going to close down? How are we going to come out to do that? So all the detail you give your individual players, they should know in their individual roles and responsibilities all the detail within that. Okay, so if you ask them, well, when are you supposed to get between the ball and the wide man, when the ball's on the opposite? So you should know. You know, what do you do in here when the ball gets switched quickly into you? What do you do? Oh, I'm supposed to spring out and close it. So they should be able to answer all those if you've given the detailed information that they require and how they're going to do it. Okay, that's key.
So that's quick. Could you go over again? Once one of your central midfielders has done it.
Yeah.
Because you told him to, or you decided to go for it. In transition, how does the one that hasn't gone for it and the one that's recovering, how do they need to organize themselves?
So, if you saw that in the session, Dom from this particular area made that run, didn't he? Towards the end.
So he's gone forward.
And actually got cut out. We were lucky. I was hoping they'd get a counter attack and come through here so they could see the full picture. But you know, that's just one session. You'd be doing that over a period of weeks and months, wouldn't you? Right? So all of a sudden, we've only got one in this area. So for me, if that area is important, and I'm thinking this team I'm playing against or wherever are going to be dangerous in those areas to counter attack against my team, for example, then I've got to make sure I've got it covered in some shape or form. So what he did, remember, was come across to here, so he became this man, and then he pulled Justin into there, so he made that run, okay, as it broke down. Now, it depends, okay, if he's already gone into those areas, we might be at that particular time 3v1 at the back, so I'd push one of the backs in to make it a 2. Okay, so you could do that. It could be the full-back, it depends. If they're 2v2 at the back, you can't. So you might have to just do it with a 1 until he gets back. If he goes through in there and he scores, you say, great, well done, you saw it, great goal, right? If he gets cut out and they go through here and score, then he gets the biggest bollocking, doesn't he? So, but he knows, so that's why you've got to be clear, when does he go? Because if you're loose, right, and he goes all the time, and doesn't know the best time to go and so on, then what happens is that, you know, he'll make more decisions wrongly, and if he does, it's going to cost your team, because when it breaks down, you're going to get hurt. So he's got to be clear from your viewpoint. What you can't do is this, exactly that. As a coach, he gets in and we score and go, brilliant, Dom, brilliant, fantastic, great run. Does exactly the same thing in the same scenario next time. The pass is a bad one for him, gets cut out, they go through here and they score, and you give Dom a bollock. Because then he doesn't know what you want, right? He can't win, right? Does he want me to go in that scenario, or does he not want me to? Because once I went, I got praised. The next time I went, I got a bollocking. That's when you, as a coach, aren't clear what you want from your players. So as long as the players are clear about what you want him to do, when does he go, and so on. And if you want him to go and take those chances, fine. If you don't, that's fine. But he needs to be clear about his role. So, what does he do? When does he do it? Where? Which area of the pitch? Okay, and get in there. So that's the detail you would need to give your player.
Okay, sure. That's one. Sorry.
How would you set up your 3 midfielders and what's their shape and responsibility? Obviously, forwards integrate with left fielders.
In a 4-3-3. How long we got?
Well,
right. What type of 3 have we got?
Well, that's what I'm asking you. Is it a diamond? How do you play? Play 1 and 2 in the middle?
I can play it every way.
Okay, yeah.
But as long as you know the roles and responsibilities and the different setups, you can play any of them. So you can play with a D player,
D player.
and your two. Yeah, you try and go like that.